Good morning and welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Church of Brunswick, Maine. My name is Michael Cain and I'm a member of our Board of Trustees. Turning first to the announcements, our charity with soul this month is the Mid-Coast Humane Society. Our treasurer, Cindy Parker, has described new ways to donate to Charity with Soul in the current issue of the PM. Also, if you haven't already done so, please sign up for a Zoom with the transition team so you can take part in a small group discussion that will help shape the future of our church. Today's service will be led by Maryli Tiemann. Her topic is the magic and inspiration of poetry, standing on the shoulders. Maryli and her husband David have been members of UUCB for over 30 years. They've engaged in many ways, including serving on the board and with various committees. Right now, Maryli is a member of our choir, and she's also chair of Buildings and Grounds, which she says must be one of the easiest committees to be on during this pandemic. She's here this morning wearing another hat as co-chair of Brunswick's Longfellow Days, now in its 16th year of celebrating poetry and the legacy of Henry Wadsworth Longfellow. Maryli's grateful to be with us this morning, even though she truly wishes she could see you while sharing reflections. She asked me to encourage you to send her an email with your reflections so we all might feel a little closer connected. Her email address is within the order of service. We hope you enjoy the service and thank you for joining us.
Hello and good morning. My name is Toben and I serve as your Director of Religious Exploration. It's not often these days that I find myself here in the rocking chair, but while I'm here, I thought I would read to you a wonderful poem, Stopping by the Woods on a Snowy Evening by Robert Frost, with illustrations by Susan Jeffers. I hope you enjoy. For Jude's the Jewel. Whose woods these are, I think I know. His house is in the village, though. He will not see me stopping here to watch his woods fill up with snow. My little horse must think it queer to stop without a farmhouse near. Between the woods and frozen lake, the darkest evening of the year. He gives his harness bell a shake to ask if there is some mistake. The only other sounds the sweep of easy wind and downy flake. The woods are lovely, dark, and deep. But I have promises to keep. And miles to go before I sleep. And miles to go before I sleep.
Recently, I had the opportunity to assist in the closing of the family home of our minister emeritus, Brad Mitchell, after his death. There were many days of packing and going through cupboards and files. One afternoon, I came upon a folder labeled Last Things. In it were 3 examples of a column Brad used to write for our Paris Messenger when he was minister. I'm honored to share his thoughts with you from over 20 years ago. Last Things by Brad Mitchell. We lose a lot of life waiting for the weather to change. If you're like me, you let a drizzly day postpone the walk you were going to take. You say to yourself, I'll just wait until the clouds go and the sun comes out. Perhaps the reason for the delay is that we think the day ahead might make us uncomfortable. The cold rain on our faces, our clothing damp, the wind chill cutting through our serenity. Emotional weather is like that too. The storm clouds of anxiety or blues or impatience drive us from the moments as we put our lives on hold. This is not the kind of life I'm prepared to live in this moment, we think. as we dive into one addiction or another to comfort ourselves until the weather changes. Yet, the necessary fact of life is that weather changes are integral to living. My sense of it is, while temperate and sunshiny days offer us a chance to celebrate life, stormy weather offers us the opportunity to deepen our lives. We need both in celebration and in deepening. Both enhance our life experience. In stormy weather, we have the opportunity to seek out that which really sustains us and to find the beauty and truth in our lives that is not so overt and obvious. The blues may haunt us, but they offer us the opportunity to plumb the depths of our being and to face truths we may be ignoring. Yes, we need the sunshine for celebration, but let us not postpone living in the storms. Let us live the storms with a different kind of energy, which moves inward and reveals us to our deeper selves.
The summer fields are mown, when the birds are fledged and flown, and the dry leaves strew the path, with the falling of the snow, with the cawing of the crow, once again the fields we mow gather in the aftermath. Not the sweet new grass with flowers is this harvesting of ours, not the upland clover bloom, but the rowan mixed with weeds, tangled tufts from marsh and meads, where the poppy drops its seeds in the silence falling of the snow, with the cawing of the crow, once again the fields we mow and gather in the aftermath. For the
light, source of all to thee we raise this our hymn of grateful praise for the wonder of each hour of the day and of the night. Hill and vale and tree and flower, sun and moon and stars of light, source of all to thee we raise this our hymn of grateful praise.
You know, it's too bad that even a mention of poetry can cause some folks to stay away or grimace as if they've been asked to eat bugs raw. I wonder if it's because somewhere they were dragged through difficult poems in school, poems that didn't speak to them, or worse, were so confusing and abstract that they seemed only garbled, unconnected words meaning nothing, or much worse, maybe communicating, "Yo, reader, you're too simple to understand the deeper meanings of human feelings." Egad, what a message to receive, huh? No wonder you'd shy away from that experience. Now, I certainly don't want to lay blame on teachers or on poets. In fact, I want to look toward inspiration and admiration. I'd rather hope that our brief time together might highlight a path of being inspired by poetry and honoring poets. For poetry can and does communicate some of the most enjoyable and most profound moments of being human. So I'm thinking, let's take poetry apart. To begin, let me share some observations about human nature from our own childlike point of view. I've noticed that children love treasure hunts, even if it's just finding peanuts in the shell when we hide them in our yard, or eggs at Easter time. I hide peanuts for birthday parties sometimes, and once, moments before the grands were to arrive, I walked about our house with a huge bag of nuts and tucked them everywhere that looked inviting. And when the children arrived, I handed each a paper bag and set them off with glee. Only minutes later, they returned with droopy faces and empty bags. "There are no nuts, Grammy." Shocked, I went out myself and looked everywhere I knew I had placed them. And the children were right. Not a nut. Nowhere in sight. And I was really perplexed until out of the corner of my eye, I caught a swish of one of our neighborhood squirrels. What a double surprise it was in this treasure hunt. Like the twist or the double hidden clue in a mystery story, we all enjoy and thrive on discovery. Also, there is a basic human joy within rhythm. Maybe it's because of a mother's heartbeat within our becoming. Watch an audience when some particularly rhythmic section of a song is played. Even the most stoic listener will begin to loosen as feet taps and eyes soften with the beat. The Ken Burns Jazz Series episodes that focus on the swing era are a feast of audience movement, as well as great music. And for centuries, rhyme has graced our music and filled our children's verses, From Mother Goose to Dr. Seuss, these childhood introductions expand much like music's earliest lyrics to Cole Porter and Dylan. There's just something about rhyme. Maybe it's because the expectation of the next words are easier, knowing it rhymes with the one preceding. Da-da-da-da June, da-da-da-da moon. So perhaps there is an element of treasure hunt discovery there as well. Or maybe it's the sense of rhythm again. The sound mimics the beat somehow. Whatever. These two poetic devices bring human pleasure. You can feel it in your bones, right? Rhythm and rhyme. Well, poetry can offer musical rhyme and rhythm and the fun of discovering the stuff of mystery. Yeah. Sometimes an engaging poem offers us a chance to read it slower, to look at the carefully chosen words and figure out the intended meaning from the poet. And then it can also offer playfulness with words and our innate ability to picture images with words. Like when I mentioned Dr. Seuss, I wonder if you imagined the Grinch or Cat in the Hat, complete with costumes and unique faces. Funny that I don't even have to say their names or words, and you already paint the pictures. Isn't it? It's simply basic human ability, or maybe magic human ability, to bring the pictures to life in our mind's eye through the magic of words. Truly, poets know if they use the word snow, that you will see white. They know they don't have to say white snow. And they know they can play with words too. They know if they say, like Frost did, the sweep of easy wind, that we will see the movement of a soft broom, even though they don't say broom. Or what if they imply, as Frost did, the shake of a horse's head as the horse's way of asking a question? We kind of get that, don't we? We picture horses or dogs shaking or tipping their heads as we were if we were confused. Yeah, now, but here's where the tricky bit comes in. What if a poet says something that is just beyond our easy understanding? This is usually when I've observed that I step back from the magic of a poem. For example, what about those last lines of stopping by the woods on a snowy evening? But I have promises to keep, and miles to go before I sleep, and miles to go before I sleep. It may seem obvious what he's saying, but is it? Well, here are 2 tips. 1, poets choose their words for a poem with hyper attention. It's not like in a conversation where sometimes you don't think about the next word. So if a poet says something twice, it's wicked important. 2, sometimes words fail. Think of a time when you knew there was something you wanted to say, or something you knew that was happening around you, but the words weren't there to put the feeling together with the moment. Maybe fear froze you, or maybe it was just a perfect moment and you didn't think the words you knew could gather around such perfection. Usually a deep feeling is especially, ironically, when words seem to fail us. So, stopping during a sleigh ride in the woods on a snowy evening, just stopping, seeing the snow fall in the quiet, without another person there, that moment, those moments can be indescribable. And then they're gone. As all moments as humans, since we experience living with human limitations, and the sound of the horse's harness bells breaks the quiet, and we are no longer in the moment, and instead we think what the horse must be thinking about this stopping in the middle of nowhere, and we remember, oh, there are chores we said we would do and we better get going. But there's also this little moment of magic. And oh, how much we must do. And oh, how much there is to do until. Could frost mean something more by before I sleep? Yeah. So poems also speak to our deeper thoughts about being human. Beyond rhyme, rhythm, adventure, and pride of discovery is the curious bit of what is still out there and within us that we know is there, but is beyond easy explanation. And then when folks put an easy explanation to it, just like explaining a joke you don't get, it fades or cheapens or changes, so it isn't the same anymore. And that's the magical depth of poetry. It ventures to make bits of being human into an experience we can share without cheapening it. Well, one of the most familiar ways of doing this is to make a comparison between something concrete or real with something abstract or within us here as a feeling. For example, in that reading by Brad Mitchell, where he compared our tendency to back away from a challenging time with not wanting to walk out on a rainy day. The name for this is metaphor, and some of us can't help but see metaphors all the time. For instance, when I saw Amanda Gorman glowing at the presidential inauguration, I saw not only the rebirth of the accessibility of poetry, I also saw a flower blooming. And here's why. And it's also the part where we step into the honoring of poets. One of the first epic poems I was ever assigned was in 8th grade, back in the Middle Ages. The poem was Evangeline by Henry Wadsworth Longfellow, a rock star in his day, known worldwide, a Mainer, after whom Longfellow days are named. I kind of struggled with Evangeline. However, a year later, as a freshman in high school, I saw on black and white television Robert Frost, who wrote Stopping by the Woods on a Snowy Evening, become the very first poet to read at a presidential inauguration, JFK's. Robert Frost was already famous. However, at 86, he struggled to read his own writing due to the bright snow and a sweep of wind. So he went to an earlier poem he had memorized, and here are snatches of what that looked like.
First, the dedication. Summoning artists to participate in the august occasions of the state seems something for us all to celebrate. And today is for my cause a day of days. And his be poetry's old-fashioned phrase, who was the first to think of such a thing. This tribute to be his, that here I bring, is about, no, I'm not having a good life here, sorry. Is about the new order of the ages. I can't see on this side. Is about the new order of the ages that God, that in their Latin, our founding sages, God gave us his approval of. Let me have it. I just have to get through it. I can. I think I'll say this was to be a preface to the poem I can say to you without seeing it. The poem goes like this. The land was ours before we were the land. She was our land more than 100 years before we were her people.
Incidentally, that was Lyndon Baines Johnson, who was offering his top hat to Frost to help shade the sun, but it didn't work. It did add some humor, and the next day, the Washington Post praised Frost's humanity. I guess since this was the first time many of us had ever heard a poem performed by a poet, by the poet himself. And that in itself was a heck of a lot more human than words in a book. Well, the next inaugural poet was at Bill Clinton's presidential inaugural in 1993, and that poet was Maya Angelou, also famous already as she stepped to deliver her poem On the Pulse of Morning. She was vibrant. She was commanding. She almost sang out her thoughts. And I suspect, because she was a woman and Black, this moment caused many to rethink their picture of what it meant to be a poet. Take a look at what that moment gave us.
But today, the rock cries out to us, clearly, forcefully, "Come, you may stand upon my back and face your distant destiny, but seek no haven in my shadow. I will give you no hiding place down here. You, created only a little lower than the angels, have crouched too long in the bruising darkness, have lain too long face down in ignorance, your mouths spilling words armed for slaughter. The rock cries out to us today, you may stand upon me, but do not hide your face.
And again, the press was a twitter with praise for Angelou, poetry, and proclaimed this would be an historic moment. So, this brings us to a 22-year-old self-proclaimed skinny girl who blew the top off even the grumpiest I don't get poetry soul when Amanda Gorman performed The Hill We Climb last month at Biden's inaugural. Her hands wove us through her thoughts, her eyes sparkled, her words rapped, even though there were many who'd never heard rap, might not have realized this. She wasn't just reciting a poem. She felt it. She was it. And her emotions were raw, fresh, full, and penetrating. She stood on the shoulders of Frost's desire not to stumble on words, and Angelou's willingness to bring spunk to poetry. And let's not kid ourselves. Amanda Gorman knows this. She even stood on Longfellow's shoulders. Longfellow, American born before Maine became a state. He stepped up as a poet when his father wanted him to be a professional, a lawyer, or even a minister, or, well, not a poet. Yet, Longfellow stepped up as a poet when folks were still reading British literature, when there wasn't really a sense of what American poetry was or could be. He wrote so folks all around the world might share common experiences. He wrote about immigrants and loss, about children and love, and even was among the first to write of Americans' indigenous people, though he wrote without really understanding the realities of their lives. By the way, the poem Frost chose, which he had memorized, skewed historic facts too. Yet in all these inaugural poems, there is a pulse of hope. And all of them care about the promise of democracy. And what better place to feel that than within a presidential inauguration of the United States of America. So now, on the shoulders of her ancestors, there is the flowering of Amanda Gorman. But I'm not going to show her reading at Biden's inauguration, nor of her performance at the halftime of this year's Super Bowl. But take a look at her, even a bit younger, speaking about poetry at a TED Talk.
Most of my life, I was particularly terrified of speaking up because I had a speech impediment, which made it difficult to pronounce certain letters, sounds, and I felt like I was fine writing on the page, but once I got on stage, I was worried my words might jumble and stumble. What was the point in trying not to mumble these thoughts in my head if everything's already been said before? But finally, I had a moment of realization where I thought if I choose not to speak out of fear, then there's no one that my silence is standing for. And so I came to realize that I cannot stand standing to the side, standing silent. I must find the strength to speak up And one of the ways I do that is through this mantra where I call back to what I call honorary ancestors. These are people who might not be related to you by blood or by birth, but who are more than worth saying their names because you stand on their shoulders all the same. And it's only from the height of these shoulders that we might have the sight to see the mighty power of poetry, the power of language made accessible, expressible. Poetry is interesting because not everyone is going to become a great poet. But anyone can be, and anyone can enjoy poetry. And it's this openness, this accessibility of poetry that makes it the language of people. Poetry has never been the language of barriers. It's always been the language of bridges. And it's this connection making that makes poetry, yes, powerful, but it also makes it political.
And these are her words again. And it's only from the height of these shoulders that we might have the sight to see the mighty power of poetry. The power of language made accessible, expressible. And it's this openness, this accessibility of poetry that makes it the language of people. Yep, folks. Poetry is about to explode into every corner of every feeling with our very beings uprooted. If we just open up to it. As a child might hunt for treasure. Dare to feel the beat, hear the flow, delve into what challenges us, what celebrates our poets, standing on the shoulders of our ancestors.
Shot an arrow into the air. It fell to earth, I knew not where. It flew so swiftly that my sight could not follow in its flight. Played a song into the air. It fell to earth, I knew not where. For who has sight so keen and strong that it can follow the flight of a song? Long after, in an oak, I found that arrow still unbroke, and found that song from start to end in the heart of a friend. heart of a friend. I found an arrow. I found an arrow.
I miss seeing you all in person. I miss so much of our gatherings. I want to return to Brad's words for our benediction, because I think they are interestingly appropriate for today. Here's the last of what he said in this Last Things. Yes, we need the sunshine for celebration, but let us not postpone living in the storms. Let us live the storms with a different kind of energy, which moves inward and reveals us to our deeper selves. And I'd make a pitch for finding that in a poem.
The hour was late, the fire burned low, the landlord's eyes were closed in sleep, and near the story's end a deep sonorous sound at times was heard, as when the distant bagpipes blow. At this all laughed, the landlord stirred, as one awakening from a swoon, and gazing anxious round the room, protested that he had not slept, but only shut his eyes and kept his ears attentive to each word. Then all arose and said good night. Alone remained the drowsy squire to rake the embers of the fire and quench the waning parlor lights. While from the windows, here and there, the scattered lamps a moment gleamed, and the illumined hostel seemed the constellation of the Bear, downward athwart the misty air, sinking and setting toward the sun. Far off the village clock struck one,